Steve King.
I thank the gentleman from Florida for pulling this special order together and for his generous introduction, and especially for Mr. Yoho's leadership on the restoration of Article I authority and addressing the executive overreach that has become part and parcel of the Obama administration. It didn't begin there, but it needs to end with the next president of the United States and be slowed down in the last months of the Obama administration. I was just exercising a thought here as I was reviewing some of the executive overreach that we've seen from this president, and Mr. Speaker, and it occurred to me that take a look at the Declaration of Independence and review some of the, I'll call them the lamentations of our founding fathers. And it comes, let's see, to this effect, Mr. Speaker. And when we get to the laments, these are the things, the wrongs that have been committed by the King of England. And it says in the Declaration, the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. That sounds like the history of our current President of the United States. And then the history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having a direct object, the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. This is from our Declaration, Mr. Speaker, and I will just quickly hit some of these. He has refused his assent to laws. He has forbidden the governors to pass laws. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of people. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby, summarizing that, hinders legislative activity elsewhere. He's endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither. He has obstructed the administration of justice. He has made judges dependent upon his will. He has elected a multitude of new offices, that would be his czars. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies. Well, not quite, but rumors of them do exist. We could go on and on and on. The grief that King George dished out on our original colonists here at the time of the Revolution, at the time of this Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. But I look at the present times, and it rings to be pretty close along the way. They are echoes of 1776 in the overreach of the President of the United States. I would start with, I mentioned them. He's appointed, this is a list from some testimony before the Executive Overreach Task Force, which I have the privilege to chair. And among this list are some of these. He's appointed policy czars to high-level positions to avoid constitutionally required confirmation hearings. That could be lifted almost right out of the Declaration of Independence. By modifying, delaying, and ignoring various provisions of Obamacare in violation of the law itself. That's a long list of things on Obamacare that the President has altered outside of the law. By attacking private citizens for engaging in constitutionally protected speech, utilizing the IRS to diminish that as well. By issuing draconian regulations regarding sexual assault on campus. By ignoring hundreds of years of legal rulings and the plain text of the Constitution, and trying to get a vote in Congress for the D.C. delegate. I had forgotten that one, actually. By trying to enact massive immigration reform via an executive order demanding that the Department of Homeland Security both refuse to enforce existing immigration law and provide work permits to millions of people residing in the U.S. illegally. Now, these all ring like the laments, that the charges that were laid against King George in 1776. It's the same tone. It's a similar message. It's going outside the law and outside the Constitution. By imposing Common Core standards on the states via administrative fiat, by ignoring bankruptcy law and arranging Chrysler's bankruptcy to benefit labor unions at the expense of bondholders. And I could continue. Well, here's one that's of significant interest to my state, and I think to Florida and many other states, and that is his imposition of a regulation called the Waters of the United States That dropped on us on May 27, 2015. The waters of the United States said we're going to regulate all the waters of the navigable waters of the United States. Oh, and this ambiguous term that's called, and let's see, it used to be and waters hydrologically connected to them. That got litigated into being too ambiguous, even for the courts to tolerate. They're the masters of ambiguity. But instead, they put the language in that said, these waters of the United States shall be the navigable waters of the United States and waters that have a significant nexus to the waters of the United States. Now, a significant nexus is going to be determined by the administration, another term of ambiguity. I see some eagerness over here on the part of the gentleman from Florida, so I'd be happy to yield to his.
Can I interrupt here?
Please.
The interpretation we got, and seasonably wet areas. I come from Florida. It's seasonably wet. I mean, we get 57 to 60 inches of rain a year, so everything is seasonably wet in our great state, and they fall into that. The little puddle in my yard, when it rains, it might stand 3 or 4 inches. We're on a sandy soil, and it stops raining. It goes away in 5 minutes, but that could be interpreted as navigable waters. And I'm probably 10 miles from a body of water, but it's just amazing.
Well, to the gentleman from Florida, we may have a legitimate competition going on here. The Waters of the United States regulation would put 96.7% of my state under the EPA's regulatory jurisdiction. Florida would be a competitor to that number, I would think.
Yeah, it would be all of Florida.
All of Florida. And I have said that if once you regulate waters hydrologically connected to, and once you get to define significant nexus, that goes all the way up to the kitchen sink. And we know that the soil itself, whether it's underwater, it can be saturated with water, and just old black Iowa dirt can be 25% water. So they've got it all. Yeah. This overreach of this federal government. Our founding fathers envisioned that there would be a competition between the branches of government to sustain their constitutional authority in each branch. They wanted to draw as bright a line as possible between the three branches of government, with the courts being the weakest of the three, and they expected that we would jealously guard the constitutional authority. Congress writes all the laws. The president is supposed to enforce all the laws. That should be pretty clear, but the president has reached across that over and over and over again, as evidenced by this list of laments that I offer, Mr. Speaker, and I'd yield to the gentleman from Florida.
Well, I appreciate you yielding back. And, you know, as I traveled as a veterinarian and I was talking to somebody, we got in a discussion about the Constitution, and they wanted to know why I was so hung up on it. And I explained to them that, you know, the very people that are fighting to preserve our founding principles that are from a creator, not from government, that government's instituted by men and women to preserve those God-given rights, and that our core values of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the unalienable rights of those things, that all men are created equal, and they're protected by the Constitution. And I said, it's that very document that people are fighting to preserve that give people on the left a voice of dissension, or people on the right a voice of dissension. And I said, and if we lose those very things that made America great, if we lose those, people will lose their voice of dissension. And if you don't believe that, go to a country like Cuba, go to China, go to Iran and proselytize. It's not possible. And the amazing thing is, that person called me about 30 minutes later and says, you know, we got thinking about that. And that really is what this is about. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's not conservative or liberal. Those are American ideologies that made this country great. And I would hope our friends on the other side of the aisle would come and say, you know what, you guys are right. We want to preserve the constitutional principles. And with that, I'll yield back to you if you have anything else to add.
I thank the gentleman from Florida and for those timeless thoughts. And something that our founding fathers discovered was a concept that was relatively new to society at the time, and that's the concept of God-given liberty and God-given rights, natural rights. Natural rights that did emerge with Locke, for example, in the United Kingdom, but they hadn't been implanted in a culture and a civilization until they were implanted into America. And here we are in this country. Everyone that serves in this chamber takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, as do all the senators on the other end of this Capitol building, as do everyone that puts on a uniform platform to defend our country, and many of them that serve within our executive branch as well. The President is a bit of an exception because he is required to deliver an oath to preserve, protect, and is required to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And what he has done instead was to turn himself into an independent legislative body, and he has said 22 times, I don't have the constitutional authority, I'm going to summarize here, Mr. Speaker, I don't have the constitutional authority to grant amnesty to millions of people in America. That's up to the legislature. He taught the Constitution at the University of Chicago for 10 years as an adjunct professor teaching con law. And that was the message, I'm sure, that he taught in those classrooms. And it was a message he taught in a classroom out here at one of the high schools in D.C. shortly before he decided to reverse his position and impose this edicts of amnesty on the United States, which went down through a long path of litigation for more than 2 years, and a week ago, last Monday, was heard before the United States Supreme Court, at least in the DAPA case, the Deferred Action for Parents of, well, Parents of Anchor Babies is what that acronym actually stands for, in my view. And so this oath that I have to support and defend the Constitution, I take seriously. I have the privilege of serving on the Constitution Subcommittee of House Judiciary and of chairing this task force, and I congratulate the gentleman from Florida for stepping up to the lead on this issue.
And if I may add to one of your comments, because you brought up the philosophers Locke and Howe, philosophers of old. You know, when we look at the American period of time, 227 years roughly, the U.S. Constitution and a constitutional republic as a country have been in existence. The longest time a republic has been in existence, when you go back to the beginning of human history, recorded history, to today, and you look at the American period, where we're at today, it's but a dot on that timeline. But yet that dot represents the largest middle class that's ever been allowed to have. The first time there's been property rights that you can have and the right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's only possible because we had a Constitution that preserved those rights. And so I would think we could all come together and protect those rights for the next generation, for the posterity of this nation. And I'd like to see if you had any thoughts on that, and then I'm going to close.
Well, I'm looking at our job and our destiny here, and I think that our Constitution, our constitutional obligation is to restore the pillars of American exceptionalism. And many of them you can identify in the Constitution itself. In the Bill of Rights, it's pretty well summarized. Freedom of speech, religion, the press, the freedom to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances, the Second Amendment rights, the property rights that the gentleman mentioned. And I would point out in the Kelo decision that happened about 10 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that they could amend the Constitution itself. Well, they didn't say they did, but that was the effect of their decision. Where the property rights came from, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. That's the part of the Fifth Amendment. The Supreme Court ruled that private property could be taken for private use as long as there was just compensation. And so they struck the three words for public use as a conditional clause out of the Fifth Amendment. We had a Supreme Court that amended the Constitution effectively. Now we have a Supreme Court last June that amended Obamacare by writing words into it or federal government would be the three words inserted there. And then the next day, they decided they would create a new command in the Constitution, a command that all states shall conduct same-sex weddings and honor them from other states, as if somehow that were the will of the people or something done under the Constitution. This is an appalling reach on the part of the Supreme Court. It's even more appalling on the part of the President of the United States. And it is our task to identify what needs to be done and start down that mission of restoring the constitutional authority and this balance between the branches of government. And I'm happy to have a chance to say a few words, and I yield that to the gentleman from Florida.
Today, in one of our committees, we're hearing about the Attorney General, how she stated that those who speak out against the administration's climate change policy as that possibly being a crime. Think about that. They're examining if you speak out against something that is unfavorable to an administration. You know, it's going against freedom of speech, our First Amendment, the very things that we fought for, that everybody who's come before us has fought for. And I think this would be something that would scare everybody if we're that close to losing the very document. And I hold in my hand, and you've seen me do this before, this is the Declaration of Independence in total, and the U.S. Constitution in total. And I think we can all agree this is not an epic in volume. I can read this in a day. This is not an epic in volume, but yet it's an epic in ideology of what free men and women can do in a country that honors and reveres this document. And it's just so important that we come together. And as I stated earlier, I think Mr. Obama has done us a favor in showing us how weak we have become as an institution and how weak our rule of law is. And for us to succeed and continue as a constitutional republic, we have to bring those Article I powers back to this body. And I'll let you do a closing, and then I want to do a quick close, too.
Okay. Well, and I thank the gentleman from Florida for that statement, and I absolutely believe that deeply. And I think one of the important things is that we are able to, that we educate the young people on what the Constitution says and what it means. And when we have a President of the United States who was a professional Constitution teacher, who we know knows the history and the text of the Constitution, takes his oath to preserve, protect, and defend it, and take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and it explains it in stop after stop succinctly in ways that I think, I agree with this president, and then turns around and by his own definition, and this is by his definition is all that I'm referring to here, Mr. Speaker, it breaks his own oath. And so we are here now trying to restore the knowledge base in America. If members of Congress arrive here as freshmen, they take an oath to a Constitution. They don't know what it means anymore. The Supreme Court thinks they can amend the Constitution. They can manufacture new commands in the Constitution. They can violate Article I authority, and the President can do so at will. But I would point out that 13 times, the President of the United States position has been unanimously reversed by the United States Supreme Court. President Obama, 13 times unanimously reversed. Another 11 times he's lost on a 5-4 decision. So he has stretched this Constitution beyond that. Even his own appointees in the Supreme Court can't stomach. That's how bad this is. But I want to see the right appointments to the Supreme Court so the whole Constitution is revered, respected, and that we see cases go before the court, and once again we can predict the court will rule on the Constitution rather than their political whims.
Thank you, sir. And I appreciate you bringing that up because, you know, you bring up how many times it's been overstepped as of recent, but other administrations have done it in the past. But it sets a precedent from this point forward. If we don't rein it in now, when do you rein it in? You wait for the next candidate to come in, and we've had talks about that. And if we don't do it now, it would be like buying fire insurance after your house catches on fire. It doesn't work. And so it's so important that we come together as a body. And again, the Constitution is not a product of Republicans or Democrats or conservatives or liberals. And the Constitution is not a function of government. Government's a function of the Constitution. And when government steps over of the Constitution, it's us, we the people, the representatives that were sent up here to hold and rein in the branches that are out of balance. This is all about bringing the three branches of government into balance. And then let me just wind up with this. Mr. Speaker, once again, I'd like to thank all the members who have joined me in this evening, restoring Article I powers. It's so vital to the survival of our constitutional republic. And at this very moment, there are individuals seeking the highest office in the land who have stated if Congress disagrees with them, they have no qualms about taking action on their own, circumventing Congress, and disregarding the founding principles enshrined in our Constitution. That should give concern to everybody. The time has arrived for us to take action to restore this institution to the one the founders, and granted, you can say what you want about our founding fathers, but they got this right. And again, as you and I have talked about with divine intervention, and they put in place a way to amend it, to make it better, not to get rid of it. And it's time for us to stand up to this body, the people's house. And I'll leave you with this reminder. All it takes for evil or tyranny to prevail, or for our constitutional republic to fail, is for those good men and women to do nothing. I, Mr. Speaker, and the people that have joined us tonight, our colleagues that participated, I know we will not sit idly by when the very document that has allowed so many people to be free, people to achieve beyond their beliefs, to the level never before ever achieved in human history, for that document to be marginalized by inaction. And I know my good friend from Iowa feels the same. And if you have any last remarks, you've got about a minute if you want to wrap it up.
Well, I thank again the gentleman from Florida and leadership that's here. You know, if no one stepped forward in leadership and we just went along as if somehow the Constitution were going to be restored, it would never be restored. And I would remind people, Mr. Speaker, that it's one thing to give lip service to the Constitution. It's another to exercise it. Freedom of speech is being exercised here right now. Freedom of assembly is being exercised across this country right now. The right to keep and bear arms, if it were never exercised, the liberals would define it away from us. Any one of these rights that we have that come from God, defined by our founding fathers, is also something we've got to exercise and utilize. If not, over time, the enemies of freedom will find a way to say, well, it's just an artifact of history. It really doesn't matter that much. If we stopped exercising our right to keep and bear arms, in a matter of a generation, someone would say, it's just an artifact of history. We're going to confiscate your guns. And after a while, they'll zip your lip if you don't watch it. We can't let that happen. And so I appreciate this special order tonight here, the gentleman from Florida's leadership, and I appreciate my Constitution and the rights that come especially from God.
And I thank my colleague from Iowa, and I want to thank everybody that participated, and I yield back the remainder of my time, Mr. Speaker.